Hi, friends! Today we have a special holiday edition of Creative Inspired Happy for you. But before we get into that, a quick update on what I've been up to during our break from the podcast. I have been very busy over on the Substack side of Creative Inspired Happy, namely bringing on a co-host for the newsletter and now the podcast, Joanna Phoenix. Joanna is a writer and creativity coach, and she's joining me here today for her inaugural podcast episode. Hi, Joanna.
Hi, everybody.
Today, we have two guests for you, Emily Stone, author of Yours for the Season, and Matthew Norman, author of Grace and Henry's Holiday Movie Marathon. Today, we talk about the ins and outs of writing books that are timed for a specific season or holiday, balancing light and heavy topics in fiction such as love and grief, what to do when no one shows up at your bookstore event, handling rejection and building a long career in publishing, our favorite holiday books and movies, and so much more. Creative Inspired Happy is a video podcast featuring interviews with the biggest names in books, as well as rising literary stars, about what made them fall in love with stories, why they write, their biggest successes and disappointments, and of course, their latest books. All hosted by me, New York Times bestselling author Evelyn Skye, and writer and creativity coach Joanna Phoenix. You can join our warm community for free to get behind-the-scenes insights about author life, book recommendations, the opportunity to ask questions of upcoming podcast guests, and more. Just go to creativeinspiredhappy.com or follow the link in the episode notes. We hope you enjoy the show. All right, everyone. Welcome back to Creative Inspired Happy. It's been a minute. Today, we are thrilled to have a special holiday edition for you. And we have Emily Stone and Matt Norman. Emily's novel is Yours for the Season, a fun enemies to lovers, a second chance Christmas romance set in the UK. And if you're watching the video version, Joanna is doing her best Vanna White impersonation and holding up the books. And then Matt's book is Grace and Henry's Holiday Movie Marathon. It is a poignant and heartwarming holiday romance set in Baltimore. So welcome to you both. How are you?
Hi, thanks
so
so much
far,
for
so
having
good.
us.
Yeah. Thank you for having us. Yeah, this is great.
Thanks for being on the show. Holiday books and movies are some of my favorites. I'm a little fangirl of Christmas. Emily, I wanted to start with you. This is not your first holiday rodeo. You've published 4 holiday romances. And I was wondering what draws you to the season.
So do you know what? I've slightly accidentally started doing it. My first book, Always in December, I had the idea of the ending first, and I knew it was going to be set around Christmas because I wanted to kind of play around with which Matt will also know because I think he does this very well in his novel, but the kind of intersection of grief and love at Christmas, and it can be such a tough time for people who have lost someone or who are grieving in some way, and I lost my mum as a kid, so I was kind of playing around with that with Always in December. And then as a result of that, the reception was amazing around the world, actually, and especially in the US, but kind of sold in lots of different territories. And it kind of kicked off my writing career in a way I'd never expected. And then I sort of became drawn accidentally to writing holiday books. And now it's become a tradition, which I love. My favorite thing is on Instagram when people tag me and say, it's not Christmas until I've read one of your books. It was a kind of accidental way in, but I think I love that, the kind of different feelings that the holidays can evoke and how you end up kind of working through that and that like warm Christmassy feeling alongside something a bit deeper, hopefully.
And Matthew, this is your first foray into holiday. How did you end up here with this novel?
Total accident, just like you just said, Emily. I mean, it was, I've written a bunch of non-Christmas books, 5, to be exact. And I just sort of stumbled into this. I had the idea for the characters who were going through this particular situation, this sort of shared but different kind of loss. And I was trying to think of ways, to do a timeline for a book, beginning, middle, and an end. And I thought, what would be the jumping off point? What would be a difficult time for them both that they would kind of have to be getting through? And I realized that, the first holidays without their spouses was it. And I worked backwards from there. And I'm a long time Christmas movie lover. Like, I've probably been scanning the world for a Christmas movie novel for like 15 years. And so the two just kind of came together, and I was like, there you go. That's the plot of the book.
So I think that we had this question for later, but since you mentioned Christmas movies, what are your favorite Christmas movies? Is there anything that inspired you to write this book or just a favorite?
When you write a novel with holiday movie in the title, you have to be prepared for that question. And so, believe me, I am. And to me, because over the last, a book is weird because you finish it and then so much time passes before it actually comes out. And so, I'll just be telling my friends or coworkers or people at the grocery store, what my book is about. And they're always, what is your favorite? And then they'll say some sort of weird nuanced movie from the 1940s that I've never heard of. And I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. With me, it is literally the most obvious things you can possibly imagine. Like it's Love Actually, it's Elf, it's Christmas Vacation. Those are the ones that I grew up watching and that just absolutely just light a candle of nostalgia in my chest starting every, mid-November. And I just kind of wanted to recreate that feeling in a book, essentially.
I love that. Emily, do you have a favorite holiday movie? And then since Matt was talking about just being prepared for the holiday season, I'd also love to hear about publishing holiday books. But first, your holiday movie.
So I'm with Matt. I'm Love Actually all the way. I think I reference Love Actually in more than one of my books.
Yeah.
And The Holiday, the classics. I think Love Actually. I used to, when I lived in London with housemates, we used to watch it like every year together to get into the spirit of Christmas when we were all living in London, like away from families.
Yeah, I love Actually. Joanna, favorite movie?
Yeah, I first saw Love Actually when I was studying abroad at Oxford, and I just went to the movie theater by myself because I was like a little homesick, and that movie
Oh.
hugged me, and I was like, "Yep, for all the cliche that it is, Love Actually for sure."
Yeah.
And Christmas Vacation is like when I was like from my youth. That like Christmas Vacation always makes me smile. There's something about Chevy Chase's character and his sort of like beating heart of optimism that just I'm like, it's going to be okay. Chevy Chase is here.
Totally. What I love about Christmas Vacation is that it came out when I was a little kid, and I still love it just as much. I think emotionally and intellectually, I have not matured since the mid 1990s. But yeah, it's just something about that movie. It's just so universally funny.
Well, it's fun. I started out really loving the kids in the movie. And now as I
Oh,
watch it
right.
as a parent, I'm like, oh, it got a lot more real.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Emily, you write these holiday romances every year. People look forward to them. I think what would be really interesting to hear about is what is the publishing cadence? Because, there is kind of a rhythm, a timeline for publishing, but it's super important, I think, when you have a book that people are expecting and it has to come out at a certain time of the year. What is your rhythm like?
So I always write them out of sync with the actual holiday. I have to remember what it's like to be cold sometimes. Like I wrote I've just handed in my sixth book, which is also a Christmas book. And it's a really emotional one. So I cried quite a few times writing it. And I think it might be my favorite one, but I wrote it and I was like sat out in the garden with a glass of like cold white wine in the evening once and the sun was still out, and I was like trying to remember what it felt like to be like in front of the fire. But I always hand them in like over like summer the year before they come out. So they come out in like September, October every year. So I hand them in the summer the year before, and then I wait on edits, and then I get edits. Well, I'll get them imminently, I think. And then I kind of edit, and then the final page passes are usually like January, February. So it's all signed off, not quite a year ahead, but nearly a year ahead. And then we have all the covers and everything and the US are usually actually quicker on that than the UK side of things. But yeah, very much kind of working a year in advance, but that means I have to write them not over December.
How
Matt,
do you
I
get
guess
yourself in the mood? How do you get yourself in the mood?
I look at a lot of photos online. So the most recent one, this is confusing because I'm trying to talk about I'll talk about yours for the season. With yours for the season, it's set in the Highlands, so I did a lot of like looking at photos of the Highlands in the cold snow, and looking at photos of Christmas markets. They go to a Christmas market at one point, and then so when I look at things, I think I don't know if you're the same, Matt, but I can then like have all the sensory overload, so I can imagine the smells and I can imagine what it is to be there. So maybe I'm quite a visual person. and then place it in. I mean, for me, always character is the way in, really. So whatever they're going through, and then if you put them in that moment, it becomes easier. Yeah.
And then, Matt, I had a question for you because your book also came out in the fall season, but you have to promote a holiday book. And for a lot of books, like for example, my books usually come out in the summer. And I think these days the expectation is you need to do the big push and get your sales the week that the book comes out. But for a book that comes out in the fall that's actually poised for the holidays, how has that been different for you versus your other fiction that's come out before?
It has been strange because all of my books until now have been released, like you said, kind of early summerish, and it's, my book launches have always been very hot. I live in the Northeast and I live in Baltimore, so it's always blazing hot when my books come out. And yeah, you're right. And even though it is early fall, Baltimore still feels very like late summery here at times, And so, when the book came out, I just kind of rolled with it. Like on social media, I was posting holiday pictures, things like that. The marketing materials for the book have, snow and snow views and pictures of Christmas trees. And I was like, you know what, let's just roll with it. I think the audience is sophisticated enough to know what's going on. The book came out, in October, mid-October. And I think, people are like, okay, this is a holiday book. It says it right in the title. Let's roll with it, and so it seemed to go pretty well. I think people were ready. It was a depressing summer in the United States. I think we needed to jump right into Christmas.
We had a really summery summer. I don't think anyone was ready for winter or Christmas here.
Yeah.
I think we're just on Evelyn. Like, I don't know if you found this too, Matt, but the weird thing that I find about the holiday books, still 5 books in, is that all the reviewers have to read them really early. So they have to read them before they're like over summer, and then you get so many comments on like they're like reading when it's really sunny and they're not quite in the mood, and actually mostly the reviews are really kind and lovely, but you do get some people that are like struggling to put themselves in a holiday mood, or that wait, I guess, to read them. So like, I don't know if that's a bit different.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of book bloggers reading our books on the beach, and just being like, we're going to have to, think about candy canes and Love Actually and all that.
You guys both write about love and grief in your holiday romances. And that to me is just a beautiful juxtaposition, but a big one to hold as both a human and a writer. How do you go about that? Emily, you talked about your experience early losing your mom. So maybe Matthew, you could talk a little bit about how you ended up writing about 2 spouses that lose their partners.
So there are 2 people in my life. One is my oldest friend, and one is sort of a new friend that I know through other people who lost their spouses way too young. One suddenly, one in over a long illness. And their stories fascinated me because I think, as an adult person who's married, I've obviously thought about those sort of domestic worst case scenarios in my own life. I mean, I've been blessed not to have a situation like that. But just the emotional Everest that those 2 went through and continue to go through. I was really just fascinated by that. And I thought for a while, is it right to sort of tell their stories? And I talked to them both about it, and they don't know each other. They live on different sides of the country, but, they were down with it and they understood, the story I wanted to tell. And, I'm mostly a comedic novelist. I mean, my books are, I'd say, 60% comedies. And even within the book, as heavy as the topic is, I think my book is like 60% a comedy, and for a while, tonally, I struggled. I'm like, oh gosh, is this not paying enough respect to what these people are going through by having comedy and sometimes silly physical comedy and talking about Chevy Chase? But then I decided to go with it, because I think we all understand that as we get older, we understand that joy and heartbreak are they're like neighbors right around the corner from each other, and we've all had the sort of sneaky laugh at a funeral. We've all, told jokes and laughed during the saddest times of our lives. And after briefly struggling in the early drafts of just figuring out the tone, I just decided to go with it. I mean, 2 things can be true. Something can be sad and funny at the same time.
I posit that maybe it's necessary.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's part of the grieving process. Just remember your humanity, because you are still you're still here, you're still alive, life goes on, and you have to continue being human.
Emily, how about for you as a writer, kind of balancing grief and romance on the same, maybe not the same page, but definitely in the same chapter? How have you found your way through that balance?
Yeah, I think it varies book on book depending on what the characters are going through. I think Matt's so right though. You do have, when you're grieving, you still have those moments of lightness. A friend of mine um, makes saying lots of depressing things, but a friend of mine died a few years ago, very young. She was late 20s, and I remember finding out about it when I was abroad and completely breaking down. And I flew home for her funeral and went with another friend. Like, we had a kind of friendship group of three, and went with my other friend. And I remember us sitting, having a drink after the funeral, and we were like crying, and then we would laugh at a memory of it. It was kind of those two things hand in hand, as Matt's already said. But I think, when you're going through it as a writer, the most recent book the book I've just handed in, actually, I was making myself cry a lot at certain moments, but then finding the moments of lightness was just as important. So and I think the reason it affected me so much is because it's about a woman who loses her friend, and then goes through the first Christmas without her, and she has a lot of flashbacks, but the flashbacks are things that will make her laugh as well as make her sad. So you're kind of with the characters on the journey, I guess. And I think as long as you stay with your character, then you're okay. That's how I kind of feel about it. And it's okay to have those kind of moments of lightness. And the romance thing, is just, I think, always the bit that's going to hopefully bring the lightness, depending on what point of the book it is. You want to have that. I mean, everybody wants the kind of traditional happily ever after, but then some of one of the most successful books was always in December, and that's been the most divisive, and I think but also the most successful, and showing that maybe people are okay with you kind of breaking the rules a little bit when it comes to the romance.
That was actually another question of mine. I'm an avid romance reader, and kind of one of the big rules of romance is the happily ever after, and how that can kind of support possibly talking about these topics, because the reader knows that you're headed to wholeness or a point of positive ending. And I'm wondering how happily ever afters may help in this topic of holding both loss and love together.
I think we all want to know that there is like a happily ever after for us, right? Especially if you're going through something. And I've had some really lovely emotional comments from readers, mainly people on Instagram, that will say that they're going through something quite similar, or they've been through something quite similar, or some like lovely messages where people are saying they haven't had time to grieve a parent or to grieve a loved one, and reading the book gave them the space and the like permission to go through it. And that is so, I'm feeling quite emotional even talking about it. It's so special to have that, and to have that connection with people, and know that you've helped somebody in that way, in like one tiny little way. But I think you're right. I think if you kind of feel safe in the story, maybe it allows you to process it a little better. And I think like most of my books do a traditional happy ever after, but there's is always, for the protagonist, there is always like they're going to be okay one way or another. And I think if you kind of help people get there and know that they have found their own, whatever that might look like, they found their own version of a happy ever after at the end, then it's that kind of safety, isn't it, to go through those feelings.
So in our community, we have a lot of readers, but also a lot of writers. And so I actually have some questions for both of you about the process of writing these books. And so the first one is from Matt. This is a romance that you've written, but it's not necessarily the same as you're not usually a romance writer. And so what were some of the things you had to learn about the genre, or how did you study the genre before you decided to dive into writing this book? Or were there any challenges that you faced that you didn't expect?
So I had, I used the word accident earlier about writing a holiday book. Writing romance was also a total accident. So my fifth novel, the one before Grace and Henry, was called Charm City Rocks. And it's about, and I realized as I was writing it, that it was the first time in my writing career I had introduced two unmarried people basically in the first 25 pages. And the A storyline of the book was going to be about whether or not they were going to get together, right? And I remember scrolling back when this dawned on me. I scrolled back to my Microsoft, first page of my Microsoft Word doc, and it said Charm City Rocks, a novel. And I wrote Charm City Rocks, a love story. I was like, yeah, it's a love story, right? Little did I know I had like taken this new route in my career. And so when I turned it in, my editor, everybody at my publisher was like, oh my God, this is a romance. We're now going to completely recategorize you. So it was a complete accident. And if I had gone about it the right way, I would have done a lot of research and studying, but I just sort of stumbled into it, and I was like, yeah, two people getting together. I can figure that out. I got together with somebody once. I'm married, And so I kind of learned the cadence. And one thing with this book in particular, that when I turned in the first draft, my editor was like, the characters really do need to be together more, because I think they were kind of parallel. They were going through their own stuff. They were sort of parallel pathing, and they would sometimes intersect. And she was very specific. She's like, they need to be together on the page more often than they are. That's kind of a rule. And I understood the happily ever after, at least in the sense that there was going to be a hopeful ending. So I got that part right. It wasn't like I was having some dark, twisted ending, but I needed them to be together. And I was like, oh my God, and she was totally right. I mean, 9 times out of 10, my editor's completely right. And I was like, okay, I got to invent some scenes and come up with some more movies and put these two people together, because this is a romance, damn it,
And do you have any tips and tricks for any writers about how to balance writing light and dark? I know that's kind of a topic that you've both been talking about.
I think that, like I was saying earlier, I think you got to kind of go with it, and you got to let the story be what it wants to be. And the audience is going to go with you if you are emotionally truthful, because uh, we all know, like I was saying before, that joy and happiness, or joy and despair, can live pretty close by to each other. And I think balancing it is something that you find out later through editing, when you're reading, and you're reading aloud, you're reading dialogue aloud, you see how it all comes together. I think that's when when you need to kind of turn the levers a little, and maybe it needs to be happier at times, and maybe you're sliding into too happy to be realistic at times. So you have to bring it back down with maybe a flashback that kind of brings the emotional mood down a little bit. But I think you got to look at it as a whole before you start being too difficult on yourself in terms of, am I doing this right yet? Look at the entire story.
And Emily, I know you talked a lot about like, just as long as you stick with the character, the story will eventually come out right. Has your experience kind of been the same as Matt's in terms of like doing this during revision? And I also wanted to ask a question, because you had mentioned about, crying during certain scenes. How do you know when what you've written is actually poignant, or whether like to an outside reader, or is it just something that you think is funny or sad because you're so, not you personally, but like as an author thinking like, oh, I'm so pleased with this thing that I wrote?
I am not sure you can ever know that until you actually get people feeding back to you. I mean, I guess as Matt said, the first people are the editor. I mean, my agent, I had a moment of doubt writing book 6. I had a lot of competing deadlines going on. So this year has been like a hectic writing year in a great way. But I had a lot of competing deadlines, and I wanted to really make sure I was doing the book justice. And I had a moment where I was thinking, oh God, is it actually terrible? And am I pulling it off? Is the concept working? Is it too forced? And I got her to read the first like 30,000, and she gave me mainly just told me that it was good, and then that helped me like finish. But I trust her judgment. She does tell me if things bad. So I think you can't really know it until you get that second opinion. And I actually think, when you're learning quote unquote to write, or going through the journey, like getting that feedback is so important to see how things are landing and to learn from it. But equally, like the bits that made me cry in the most recent book was are bits that I love, and it's because I felt so emotionally connected to the characters. And I think if you're that connected that you're making yourself cry, or probably the reverse, like where you're making yourself laugh, then you're probably hopefully doing something right, because you're putting so much into the book. And I think that can only be a good thing. I mean, I'm an incredibly emotional person, so I'm not saying you have to cry when you're writing the book. I kind of feel the big emotions quite easily, so that's a good thing or a bad thing depending on how you look at it. But yeah, I'm not sure you can ever totally know. I think the lightness, the laughter bits, I love doing that through dialogue. And I think, Matt said reading, I don't actually read it aloud, but if you play off in your head, they're the bits that will bring me personally the lightness or the laughter. Is I love the like back and forth in the dialogue. So hopefully that combined with the bits that make you cry work out okay in the end.
That makes me think of an essay that I read of Matt's talking about how you're really going for funny. And you mentioned earlier that 60% of this novel is comedic. And how do you train for comedic dialogue? How do you get funny on the page and have it hit?
That's a good question. I think, some of it is just what your aesthetic is, what your personality is, and that comes out. I mean, some people simply aren't funny. Some great writers simply aren't funny. And so they just don't try to be funny, But I think that early on in my writing life, which was very young, because I was a little kid when I started writing. I was one of those writers that stumbled into it when I was like 6 or 7 years old. And I would write things to and read them to my parents. And if they would laugh, laughter became very much a sort of currency for me. Like I was like, oh, that's a win. I got a physical reaction out of something that I wrote. And so I think that is just kind of my default setting, is always trying to get that laughter. And sometimes as I've gotten older and maybe matured as a writer, I understand enough about emotion and the writing process to know that sometimes laughter and humor can undercut the larger point you're trying to make, because not everything is slapstick, And so again, that's a little bit through editing. I think that my books over the course of revision probably become less funny, I would think, or at least there's fewer botched attempts at humor. The things that are botched go away and are replaced maybe more with real moments, and the actual stuff that's funny stays. So I think net they probably become less funny.
So revision is a friend of humor.
Yeah, totally. That's some of my advice to any writer who's first starting out or maybe trying to change the way they write books process wise. I believe you should try to get to a first draft as fast as you can. Get a beginning, middle, and an end as quickly as you can. Allow yourself not to be perfect. Allow the sentences not to sound like poetry yet, But once you have a completed thing, then you can start really getting to work.
Emily, what is your process for writing? Are you also a fast drafter, or do you focus on the prose first?
I'm pretty fast. I usually write I don't know what fast means, but I write the first draft usually in about 3 months. But I do a lot of planning. I to the extent that the planning can be as long as like a novel. I have to work it all out, and I use Scrivener. I don't know if anybody else uses Scrivener, but I work it all out. Lots of novels. Work it all out on the I have a chapter by chapter. It doesn't I move things around quite a lot. It doesn't always stay like that, but it stays pretty close to the plan. And actually, so far, I mean, let's see what happens with the new one. But so far, the novels have stayed pretty recognized. There's not been any massive changes. Actually, that's not true. There's one novel that was pretty massive change, but I knew that wasn't right about 30,000 words in, and I completely scrapped that and started from the beginning again. But the ones I've actually finished and handed in, I do obviously go through edits, but they are not massive overhauls of the whole story. But I kind of agree with that. Get it down, and then you can worry about it to some degree later. Although I find it really hard to go back and do the line by line edit. So maybe I'm not. Maybe I need to do more of that to make it. I mean, I'm also actually probably one of those writers. I don't try and be funny because I don't think I necessarily I'm not going to ever be Sophie Kinsella, or I can't do it. I mean, I wish I could. Maybe I should go and try and learn how to do it. But the bits of humor I try and get in are always through dialogue, because I think maybe even if you're not funny, you can get away with it then, because you can have the back and forth between the characters. And then I feel like if I'm making it funny or if I'm laughing, it's like they're making me laugh, so then it feels fine. So I guess those bits I'll go back and work on. But yeah, lots and lots of planning, then I can get it down. I find if you have too long in between as well, I then struggle to get back into it. So I need to try and write it like quickly because I'm writing every day rather than trying to get it down super quickly, so to speak.
We have writers at every stage in the creative, inspired, happy community. And I really I enjoy both of your process. You're very far into publishing. But Matt wrote a piece for LitHub in which he talked about his first reading as a published author, in which one fan showed up, one reader. And I really enjoyed that piece because it symbolized there is a broad spectrum of how we are received and a broad spectrum of how we're received over an entire career. So now you're on novel 6, and I wanted to know what you would say to someone starting out or someone at the beginning when that one reader is showing up, or we're even hoping that one reader shows up. What advice would you give to creatives?
Yeah, the scary thing about that particular situation you're referencing is it was at a Barnes and Noble, and the reading was set up in the sort of cafe area, and there were people there studying, and so I had no way of knowing who was there for me and who was just there, right? And I actually had to stand up and be like, "Hi, everyone, who is here for me?" And one young woman raised her hand. Oh my God, God bless her. And she looked as horrified as I did. And yeah, it's truly one of the worst experiences of my life. And I think that is what publishing is. I mean, I feel like when I was first starting out and I got my first novel published, I thought, this is it. I have succeeded. You know, I got the yes from a publisher and my book will be out. And man, there's a lot of, before you start publishing books, no's show up in very obvious place where people say to you no, but rejection show up in different ways later on. Nobody shows up to your reading. No major reviewers review your book, stuff like that. I mean, no's arrive in different, maybe more subtle ways, but equally as devastating. That's, there's devastation at every phase of the game, right? But I think that my advice is love the process, love the writing, do it for yourself, because the accolades that maybe you imagine are not there for but 2 or 3% of the writing community. We can all think of very, very famous writers who make a lot of money, who fill auditoriums and have lines around the block for signing. That is this many writers out of all of us, so you got to be doing it intrinsic. Intrinsic motivation is key. Love what you're doing for the work,
And Emily, you not only write holiday romance, but you write speculative romance. And so you've had really a broad career in romance. And I was wondering, from your time writing, what's changed and what you've learned in the process to make yourself, to have such an enduring career.
So I mean, enduring career, but it took me 10 years to get published. So like, it took me a really long time. And so I wrote my first book. I mean, I was like Matt, actually. I tried to write my first book when I was 11. And it was called The Ghost, and it was about a ghost who fell in love with a teenager, probably. I can't really remember.
Speculative
and I made my
romance
sister
from the
type out the
beginning.
whole thing, and then we accidentally romance, yeah, right from the get-go. And I made my sister type out. We got to like 50 pages on Word, and it was before I could back in the day, before I knew how to type with more than like 2 fingers. And then we accidentally deleted the whole thing, and she was so angry at me. But I actually seriously tried to write my first book when I was 21, and finished the whole thing, redrafted it, got like professional feedback, which felt super expensive because I wasn't, on very much, I was working as a waitress or whatever. So I didn't have the money to spend on it, but I spent on it, and it actually was really worthwhile doing. And I was convinced it was brilliant. I was A, convinced it was brilliant, and B, convinced it was going to not only be a book, but probably maybe made into a film. And I was like weirdly so confident, age 21, and like just so excited about it before I knew anything about publishing. And obviously I got every rejection under the sun from all the agents. and in hindsight, I've still got it, and it's really not a very good book. So it took me from there, and I had to do a lot of learning as a writer. So the first thing is before I even got published, my writing changed so much over that time. And I think I obviously read a lot, and I got a lot of feedback, and I read a lot of the writing books, and I just I went out on submission to agents 3 times before I got the yes from an agent. And every time I was like, if I don't get it this time, I'm going to give up. I'm clearly no good. And I think that goes back actually to what Matt said. I think if you love it, you sort of tell yourself you're going to give up, and then you don't. And then I got an agent, and then she was so excited, and she thought it was going to sell across the US and the UK. And that was actually a young adult thriller. So it was something, but it did have a romance subplot in it. And then that got rejected. So it was like a constant thing. So I think, I guess my writing in and of itself changed more in the 10 years to get published than it did after I got published. I mean, I've learned a lot. I think you have to, as Matt said, there's so many ups and downs. And I think, I hope I'm a better writer. I like the dialogue that is always something I've loved, but that's something I've worked quite hard on. And each book, there's reading as a reader, which I do, and then I also read as a writer, and I'll write down things that I love from books, and look back over phrases and listen to audiobooks actually, because it slows me down. It makes me appreciate the writing itself as opposed to just reading for plot. So all of those things I keep doing. Sorry, I've completely gone on a tangent. Now I've forgotten whether the question was about writing itself or whether what I've learned over the publishing process in general.
Just having an enduring career in this industry.
Yeah.
What has helped you keep going?
Sorry, definitely didn't answer that. I mean, do you know what, Joanne? I think a big part of it is luck. I think you can never take it for granted that people are going to want to keep reading the books or keep buying the books, or that there'll be that one book that they don't like and it puts them off me forever. So I think a big part of it is luck. I think I got really lucky with Always in December, and people are still buying that year after year, and that's meaning that my publishers are kind of more invested in me. And I got lucky having my books actually do a lot better in the US than they do in the UK, my Emily Stone books. And again, I think a lot of that is down to luck and down to my publishing team were really invested in me, and they're great, and they do really interesting things, and they're kind of behind me, and they get good slots. You really I think doing it alone, and some authors are amazing and they do it alone, self-publishing, and I have the greatest respect for them because I have no idea how I would even start to do that. So I think that, and also being, I guess being I work really hard. I mean, I think so do authors, whether or not you're published or not. I mean, I worked really hard before I got published, but I think you have to keep that in mind as well. And I work kind of all hours of the day and make sure that I do hand the books in as close to the deadlines as I can, and trying to balance the two different ones. It just means I do a lot of writing and I don't do a lot of socializing. Not that I'm recommending that as a sustainable life choice. But yeah, I mean, I don't think there's one thing. I think you have to get lucky, and then you have to not give up. And I think if you manage to do the two things, and you keep trying to learn and you keep trying to listen to the people, people giving you feedback, then hopefully you maintain it. But I mean, I'm always I'm never taking it for granted. I mean, I feel very lucky that I get to do what I love, and I have it as a career. But everything can change I hope it doesn't. Anything can change in 2 or 3 years. I mean, the flip of that is, as my agent had told me at one point when I was having a breakdown, she was like, it just takes one thing to change your luck as well. It just takes that one book that blows up, like Jojo Moyes, it takes that one book to blow off into your career, or to take it off at the beginning. And if you won't know. If you give up, you'll never get there.
So it sounds like persistence, luck, and love of the process.
Yeah, that's much. I could have just done that. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I'm taking it all in. It's so helpful to know that, especially when you haven't been published yet, that hardship is part of the process. And it's, you even experience, I love, Matt, how you were the rejection doesn't stop once you get an agent or once you sign your first contract. It keeps going in all of these subtle ways, and having resilience to that rejection makes you endure in this career, makes you keep going, strengthens your own character.
Yeah, and listening to you talk, Emily, I also, when I was 21 or so, I think I took a first run at my first manuscript, my first novel manuscript. I also had a completely wholly unearned confidence in myself. I was like, well, clearly I'm brilliant, right? Because I was sort of living on this little island as a writer. I didn't know a bunch of writers because I hadn't gone to grad school yet and sort of developed a community of writers. I was the only one of my friends who wrote. I was the only kid in high school who wrote, whatever. So I was just assumed that I was brilliant. And then when I got out into the publishing world, among real brilliant people, or people who were at least had worked with brilliant people, and when they said no to me, I was like, what do you people want? Did you not read the same thing that I did? Yeah. So it's funny. You have to have this totally unearned confidence in yourself, but you also have to be open to a lot of feedback when people are telling you that you're not brilliant. It's a weird thing that you have to. Yeah.
I also
Like
think
flexibility of the ego.
Yeah.
yeah, but the rejection thing for sure, like it definitely resilience. I mean, the rejection thing gets like Matt said, it doesn't actually get any, for me, it hasn't really got any easier. Like I don't find it easier to hear the no's. I still feel really like crushed by things. But I think the difference is that you've been through it enough that you sort of learn the rhythm of how to go through it. So you get like, if you go through rejection, you can tell yourself like, it's okay. Like I picked myself up before, I'll pick it up again. And the difference between now and, when we were 21, like for me, I mean, I have an agent as well, and she's around, and she's brilliant, and she will help pick me up. So I think it is easier when you've got other people around you to help you, even if that's just, and that's also, to telling, it doesn't have to be an agent, it can be your friends or family and people that will like help pick you back up again. It's such a weird career.
It is weird. It is so weird. Why did we choose to do this to ourselves?
I ask myself that all the time. What are we doing here?
Yeah. I should have learned how to do math. If I could go back, I would tell that kid, learn math, kid.
I was so terrible though at maths.
Yeah, do I love writing, or did I just want to build an adult life around not doing math? I don't know. Maybe both. Probably both, actually.
So we talked about our favorite holiday movies, and I wanted to also ask about your favorite holiday books. Other than your own, of course, what holiday rom-coms or holiday stories do you love to read?
That is a hard question because I actually don't read that many of them because I worry about the like getting hung up on the comparisons. I have just read Matt's book though, which is brilliant. Am I allowed to recommend that?
Yes, you absolutely are.
It made me cry more than once, but it also made me laugh. So you've done the job very well. I think it's good when you feel emotional right from the get go, and there are animals in it, and so obviously you have to love when there are animals in it. I also I don't know, but I don't know if she's published in the US. There's a UK author called Kathy Bramley who writes really cozy festive fiction, and I love hers. And likewise, there's an author called Jo Thomas, and I'm trying to remember the ones that are published both sides of the Atlantic, but they're both UK based authors, but they are the kind of wrap you in a hug. Oh, and I love Josie Silver, One Day in December. Sorry, now I do know. Now I've got lists that I do know. One Day in December I read, but I actually read it. Did I read it after I wrote Always in December? I think I was like, I'll just check that it is definitely different. And that's really good. I would read that again after I get through all my never-ending TBR pile.
How about you, Matt?
I found myself like you did, Emily. I'm glad you went first. I sort of found myself blanking a little. And I'm still not 100% sure of the title. There's a short story writer, a Southern guy in the U.S. His name is Michael Knight, and he wrote a very short collection of stories I think it's called The Holiday Season, which I thought was brilliant. And that was the first one that came to my mind. I think that I haven't read a lot in the genre, and now that I've written one, I feel like I should spend spend more time there, because it is a particular thing. It is an entire genre that I didn't necessarily know existed so specifically until I kind of jumped into it.
Okay, so as we're winding down, I wanted to ask, what's one takeaway you want your readers to have when you finish your book? When they finish your book?
Who's going first?
Go ahead.
I think I want people to have that like warm feeling. I don't know how to explain it really, but that kind of warm, like maybe you're a little bit sad, but you're ultimately you're kind of feeling hopeful. I guess hopeful is the best word I can think of. Yeah, hopeful and warm.
How about you, Matt?
I should have gone first because you just said exactly what I wanted to say. No, and I even have had trouble describing it. Like you just like it's. I don't know if nostalgia is even the right word, but it's sort of that feeling you get right here. It's your favorite part of Love Actually or whatever. It's just nostalgia. It feels timeless. I just want people to just have just that little bit of warmth right here when they finish the book.
Awesome. And then any takeaways for writers out there that are listening on their creative journey towards publishing? What would you tell them?
I mean, I think I slightly covered it earlier, but like, just don't give up. I feel like the difference between the people that make it and the people that don't are the people that do make it just keep going and almost in the face of insanity sometimes. But yeah, don't give up, but be willing to kind of learn and keep reading and keep, get feedback, or if that is open to you, or keep reading, keep learning, but don't give up.
How about you, Matt?
I love that, and that's very true. Mine is kind of specific, and I was thinking about this. There's a handful of books in my life that I've read a bunch of times for whatever reason. Either I love them or there was something about them I wanted to sort of study. And whenever I read a book over and over, no matter how much I've loved it, I'm often surprised that I don't remember the plots that well. And I think the lesson in that is that I don't think readers particularly remember plot. That doesn't mean the plot isn't necessary because it has to house everything. But I think that they remember big emotional moments. So I think that as you're planning a book, as you're writing a book, shoot for those big emotional moments, because I think that's what the reader's going to remember. That's what they're going to love about your book. And when they describe your book to their friends and why they love it, it's going to be those 2 or 3 big emotional moments.
Awesome. That is great advice. I might use that advice.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. And thank you for dipping us into the holiday season. I really appreciate both of your books. Here they are, everyone, one more time. Grace and Henry's Holiday Movie and Yours for the Season. Thank you so much for being with us, Emily and Matt.
Thank you for having us.
This was a pleasure. Thank you.
Want more writing advice and career insight? Join thousands for free at creativeinspiredhappy.com to go behind the scenes with best-selling authors and get access to our book club for writers, creativity challenges, and more. I can't wait to see you there.